Your mom handed it to you at the pharmacy checkout in 1982, 60 cents, a Harvey Comics Casper with that soft pastel cover, and you did not ask what it was because you already knew. You had been pulling them off the spinning wire rack for as long as you could reach it, taking whatever landed in your hand, flipping pages on the drive home while the windows fogged. 15 of those comics are what this video is about, and most of them have been so thoroughly forgotten that even the people who read them cannot always name them anymore. Number 13 ended up on the same rack as Casper and Wendy the Witch for years, and its main character was a bumbling World War II soldier whose title was a polite version of a phrase you cannot say in a children's comic. And number 3 ignited a real national controversy the day it hit newsstands, because it starred a literal baby devil from the pits of hell, and somehow parents kept buying it anyway. If you grew up in the 1980s, these were part of the air. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next list, because we go deep on this stuff every week. Let us count down 15 forgotten 1980s American childhood comics every kid used to read. Number 15, Fraggle Rock. The comic opened the same way every episode did, with that underground world of tunnels and radishes and creatures who sang about their worries. Jim Henson's Fraggle Rock had been an HBO show since 1983. The kind of thing you watched at a friend's house if your family didn't have cable. And in April of 1985, Marvel Star Comics brought it to the newsstand at 65 cents an issue. Marie Severin drew all 8 issues, and she captured the texture of Henson's puppet world better than most people expected. Your older sibling might have had issue 1. Your younger one probably never found a second. The series ended in September of 1986 while the television show was still on the air. It never found its footing on the newsstand, partly because the show's core audience watched on HBO and didn't browse spinner racks the way Saturday morning cartoon kids did. 8 issues, that's all. Number 14, Strawberry Shortcake. The smell was the whole point. Your strawberry-scented Strawberry Shortcake doll had that sweetness worked into the plastic, and the 1985 Marvel comic had none of it, which is probably why it felt slightly off to hold. Marvel launched it under the Star Comics imprint in December of 1984, 65 cents a copy, 6 issues total, ending in October of 1985 before most kids had collected them all. American Greetings owned the license, the same company behind Care Bears and My Little Pony, and most of the pink aisle at Toys R Us, and by 1985 the toy line had already peaked and was sliding back. The comic's most distinctive accomplishment was introducing a villain named Raisin Cain in issue 4, a character who appeared nowhere else in the franchise before or after. 6 issues in, the whole thing was over. Did your copy make it out of the house? Number 13, Sad Sack. The Sad Sack started as a cartoon strip in June of 1942 in Yank, the Army Weekly, drawn by Sergeant George Baker, a Massachusetts native who had worked at Walt Disney Studios on Pinocchio, Dumbo, and Bambi. Before the war drafted him into something else. The strip followed a nameless, hapless private through the absurdities of Army life, originally without a word of dialogue, all expression and gesture. Baker sold the rights to Harvey Comics after the war, and Harvey ran the Sad Sack series for 287 issues, from September 1949 straight through October 1982. The title was a cleaned-up version of a World War II Army phrase that would never have cleared the Comics Code Authority. Baker died in May of 1975, and the book spent its final years on reprints and borrowed momentum. You probably picked it up not knowing it was older than most television stations. Number 12. Walt Disney's Comics and Stories. This title had been running since 1940. Dell Comics launched it, then Gold Key took it, then Western Publishing's Whitman imprint carried it into the early 1980s, and none of that mattered to you at the checkout because all you saw was Mickey or Donald on the cover. Carl Barks had written and drawn the Donald Duck 10-page stories inside from the early 1940s through the mid-1960s, anonymous the entire time because neither Dell nor Gold Key put creators' names on children's comic books. Fans who recognized his style called him the Good Duck Artist because nobody knew his actual name. By the early 1980s, the Western editions were running reprints of those old Barks stories, your father's childhood in your hands without either of you knowing it. Western Publishing shut down its entire comics operation in 1984. 44 years of uninterrupted publication, and then nothing. Number 11. The Get Along Gang. 6 woodland animals, a moose and a bear and a crocodile and a few others lived in a caboose and had small, cheerful problems. American Greetings and DIC Entertainment launched them as a Saturday morning cartoon on CBS in 1984, the same corporate pipeline that produced Strawberry Shortcake and Care Bears, and much of the pastel Saturday morning lineup. Marvel's Star Comics put out a comic at the same time. The show lasted 1 season on CBS before moving to syndication, and the comic ran a handful of issues before following it into obscurity. Your mom might remember the cartoon. You might have a vague image of the moose. The comic is the part no one remembers at all. A handful of issues, a caboose full of animals, gone before anyone noticed. Number 10. Wendy the Good Little Witch. Harvey Comics had a theory about childhood fear. Take whatever scared kids and make it friendly. The ghost who wanted a friend, the devil who did good deeds, and the witch who wanted nothing but company. Wendy arrived in her own Harvey Comics title in October of 1960 with a pink-pointed hat, 3 stern aunts, a cat named Snowball, and a whole mythology of magical family tension built for 6-year-olds. She shared the Harvey universe with Casper and Hot Stuff, her own corner of that supernatural neighborhood where nothing was actually dangerous. Your younger sister might have had a Wendy issue tucked into the Casper pile. Your brothers probably reached for Hot Stuff instead. Harvey Comics ceased publication in July of 1982, and the whole lineup ended together. The standalone title was gone, and that was that. There is something worth pausing on here. By 1979, Alfred Harvey had built a company that put 32 separate Richie Rich titles on newsstands in a single 2-month period. 32 Richie Rich, Richie Rich Millions, Richie Rich Success Stories, Richie Rich and His Dog Dollar, Richie Rich and Cadbury, and more until the spinner barely had room for Casper. This was not a fluke. Harvey had been building toward it for 2 decades, operating on the logic that childhood fears could be made friendly and profitable and available at every checkout counter in America, that the spinner rack was the storefront, and every pharmacy and grocery store was a Harvey outlet. Alfred Harvey retired in 1977. Printing costs climbed. Newsstand distribution contracted. The Richie Rich expansion, meant to generate revenue, created an inventory problem that nothing could solve. On July 7, 1982, the last regularly issued Harvey Comics appeared on newsstands, and the whole neighborhood went dark in the same week. Number 9. Muppet Babies. These were not adaptations of the television episodes. That is what most people do not know about the Muppet Babies comic. When Marvel's Star Comics launched it in May of 1985, it cost 65 cents on the newsstand. The stories inside were original, written and drawn for the page rather than taken from the show. Marie Severin drew all 26 issues, and the writing went places the cartoon did not always go. In one issue, Gonzo is revealed to be an alien. Muppets from Space made that same revelation in 1999, 14 years later. The comic ran through July of 1989, quietly outlasting the show's cultural peak, and Harvey Comics eventually reprinted the run with new covers for a second round of readers. Almost nobody talks about these. 26 issues of original stories, beautifully drawn, and gone. Number 8. Uncle Scrooge. He was the richest duck in the world, and the man who created him, along with Duckburg and the Beagle Boys and Gyro Gearloose and most of the Donald Duck universe, spent nearly 3 decades drawing comic books without a single byline. Fans who recognized his hand called him the good duck artist, because no one at Dell or Gold Key would put creator names on children's comic books. His name was Carl Barks. The Uncle Scrooge series had run since 1952, and by the early 1980s, the Western publishing editions were reprinting his 1950s adventures for kids who had no idea the stories were 30 years old. Western withdrew from comics entirely in 1984, and the license moved to Gladstone Publishing, which continued the series. The copy of Uncle Scrooge you pulled from the spinner rack in 1982 was Barks, every panel of it. Were you reading the reprints and thinking they were new? Number 7. Little Lulu. She was the smart one, always. Tubby and his boys club ran the same scheme every issue, trying to keep Lulu out of their treehouse, and every issue she outmaneuvered them cleanly and without cruelty. The writer behind most of those victories was John Stanley, who started on the series in 1948 and produced approximately 7,000 pages of Little Lulu material before quitting in 1959, without ever seeing his name on a cover. Marge's Little Lulu had debuted as a single panel gag in the Saturday Evening Post in February of 1935. And by the early 1980s, the Whitman imprint editions were sold in plastic multi-packs at toy stores rather than at newsstands, which meant the accidental discovery that had sustained the title for decades was becoming harder to arrange. The series ended at issue 268 when Western Publishing shut down in 1984, 7,000 pages total and never once a BY line. Number 6. Cracked Magazine. Mad was the one your older cousin quoted at dinner. Cracked was the one you actually found. It sat at every pharmacy and every gas station spinner and every grocery store checkout, priced at about 75 cents in 1983, and it had been there since 1958, always a step behind Mad in reputation and several steps ahead in availability. In 1987, Cracked made the biggest acquisition in its history, hiring Don Martin away from Mad after his 32-year run there. The industry treated it like a theft from the Super Bowl champion. Martin called himself Cracked's crackedest artist and stayed 6 years. Your parents probably never understood why you found it so funny. The answer is that you were 12 and someone was drawing adults with enormous noses, and that was genuinely all it required. That was enough. Here is what actually disappeared when these comics started going away. It was not the comic, it was the encounter. These titles lived at the pharmacy counter, the grocery checkout, the gas station display, the pediatrician's waiting room side table. You did not go looking for them. You were already somewhere else for a completely different reason, and they put themselves in front of you. The shift from newsstand distribution to the direct market comic shop changed the fundamental nature of that transaction. A comic shop required a decision, a trip, a parent willing to drive somewhere specific. The spinner rack at the Walgreens required nothing except for you to be a child standing next to it while your mom waited for a prescription to be filled. When newsstand distribution contracted through the mid-1980s, the children's titles went first because a kid who had to be driven to a specialty store was not going to request Care Bears. They were going to ask for Spider-Man. The era of stumbling onto things ended, and an entire category of publishing went with it. Number 5. Care Bears. The Care Bears comic ran for nearly 4 years, which is longer than anyone who loved the toys tends to remember. Marvel's Star Comics launched it in November of 1985, priced at 65 cents, and the stories followed Funshine Bear and Grumpy Bear and the rest of the Care-a-Lot crew facing threats from a villain named Glump and an adversary called the Evil Spirit. Howard Post drew all of them with the same rounded softness as the toys, the same color saturation that probably covered your bedroom walls in 1984. The toy line had peaked the year before the comic launched, which meant the series spent most of its run chasing a cultural moment that had already passed. It kept publishing anyway through approximately 1989, years after the plush bears had migrated to garage sale tables with slightly matted fur. The comics survived their peak and outlasted their relevance. That almost never happens. Number 4. Heathcliff. The official history on Heathcliff's own website says it plainly. The Heathcliff comic was the top-selling title on the entire Star Comics line. Not Muppet Babies, not Care Bears, not the Smurfs, the Orange Cat. George Gately had created Heathcliff in 1973 as a newspaper strip, and Marvel adapted it into 56 issues running from April 1985 through February 1991, the longest-running title the Star Comics imprint ever produced, and the best-selling one simultaneously. The Star Comics brand faded out by issue 22, and Marvel absorbed the book into its main line without fanfare. But the comic kept publishing on its own momentum long after every other Star Comics title had folded. Gately's nephew draws the strip today. The 56-issue comic run is a different thing entirely. Years of adventures that most people who love the cartoon have never read. Did you know it ran that long? Number 3. Hot Stuff, the Little Devil. Hot Stuff launched in October of 1957, and he was, without softening the description, a tiny red devil in an asbestos diaper carrying a living pitchfork with strong opinions of its own. Warren Creamer created him at Harvey Comics, and the response from parents' groups was immediate. A devil as a role model for American children was not acceptable. Harvey Comics watched the sales numbers instead of the letters. The numbers said children had been waiting their whole short lives for a devil who did good deeds mostly out of spite, whose trident talked back, whose relatives in the underworld were perpetually furious with him. He ran 164 issues before the 1982 Harvey shutdown, came back briefly in October of 1986, and stayed through the decade's end. No one has ever quite figured out what to do with him since, and every attempted revival has struggled with the same problem the original solved effortlessly. There will never be another comic quite like him. Number 2, Casper the Friendly Ghost. He wanted to make friends. That was everything about Casper. He had started in a 1945 Paramount animated short, been licensed to Harvey Comics in the early 1950s, and the third Harvey series ran through the summer of 1982. The formula never changed across hundreds of issues. Casper tries to make a friend. The friend sees a ghost and runs. Casper is briefly sad. Something shifts. Issue after issue, decade after decade, the same emotional loop. Your kid's self did not find this repetitive. Your kid's self found it steadying. Something about a ghost who kept trying despite every indication he should stop was doing quiet emotional work that nobody labeled as anything useful at the time. Harvey revived the title in 1986 and again in 1991. The 1995 film brought him back to full cultural visibility for about 2 years. Then he faded again. Number 1, Richie Rich. In a single 2-month period in 1979, Harvey Comics had 32 separate Richie Rich titles on newsstands simultaneously. 32 Richie Rich Millions, Richie Rich Success Stories, Richie Rich and His Dog Dollar, Richie Rich and Cadbury, and 24 more, all featuring the same cheerful kid in the same blue suit with the money sign on his shirt, all around 60 cents, all waiting on the same rack as Casper and Wendy and Hot Stuff. No children's character in American publishing history has had more simultaneous titles. Richie started as a backup feature in Little Dot in 1953 and got his own title in August of 1960, and by the late 1970s he was everywhere. The whole run ended July 1982 with the Harvey shutdown. New owners revived him in 1986, held on through a 1994 film, and quietly wound down by the mid-1990s. Your mom handed 60 cents across the pharmacy counter for that copy. The whole empire fit in your back seat. What a Richie Rich comic actually felt like was a specific thing. The covers showed the same world every time. Richie in the vault surrounded by gold coins, or Cadbury the butler holding an improbable solution to an improbable problem, or the Rich's mansion doing something architecturally impossible for a joke. The inside pages had soft colors and round faces, and a world where money was absurd and inexhaustible, and nobody's genuine pain. You read them in the back seat, and the barber's chair, and the waiting room, and you did not think of them as anything. They were just the thing to do while you were waiting. What they actually were was a publishing infrastructure built entirely around accidental discovery. Harvey Comics and Gold Key and Western Publishing and Marvel's Star Comics line all depended on the same mechanism. A kid in a place that also sold comics with 5 minutes and no particular plan. When the newsstand spinner moved to the back of the store and then out of the store entirely, these titles went with it, not to the back issue bin alongside the superhero books. Quietly out, the way things disappear when the system that carried them stops working. Tell me in the comments which one you remember finding on that rack, and whether your mom said you could keep it.